let's talk about ContraPoints. So ContraPoints, also known as Natalie Wynn, is a YouTube content creator, influencer, essentially one of the originators on the online leftist essayist format, and someone who I've always admired professionally as a content creator, as being a former philosopher, and someone who's played a very big role in shaping YouTube as a platform from essentially 2016, 2017 up into what YouTube is today, essentially creating that sort of leftist bread tube space that has thrived on YouTube and currently is very popular on other sites such as Nebula, which I don't have a sponsorship for because I may look at the subscriber count. So last year I made a video, really a short, about Natalie Wynn and why I think that we have moved beyond her as a creative space and her being a prominent voice within sort of leftist activism community, and how that's fine. It's okay for someone to become a bit outdated, a bit calcified in their positions where they get into a certain vein and they stay there, and that has always been their vein. And I still hold to what I've said in that video. I've made some comments recently about people talking about it recently, and mostly it was a response to her and her comments about Gaza, the ongoing genocide in Israel and Gaza, and their current conflict right now with Lebanon and Syria that has been going off and on since, I mean, my God, the 80s, the 60s. Pick a point, you could probably find a continuation there. And the thing about Natalie Wynn is that she was recently on a bunch of podcasts, such as the Bad Faith podcast and a couple other podcasts, and there's been a lot of clips of her circulating around that don't quite show her in the best light. And I'm not going to say I gave her grace in that past video because it's a bit condescending. It's kind of missing the point, and I don't know Natalie as a person, and neither do most of the people that make content about her. But I want to talk about ContraPoints, Natalie Wynn, as a human, as a person, as someone who is a flawed person in many ways. Not in the sense of, again, from the perspective of grace, but to understand, well, how can you deal with that reality? Again, as someone who admires and respects her. So when it comes to Natalie Wynn, I feel that we have to understand that her content has really changed the past 5 years, 6 years. Really, I think she's made one really good video in Envy. She made a great video about J.K. Rowling and how she is problematic. But a couple of her other projects have been, I think, misguided, or at least that they feel that they are missing a core thesis or point to them. I think the conspiracy theory point that she was making in her video about conspiracy is that all conspiracies, especially in America, have some ties historically to anti-Semitism. And I agree. I think most conspiracy theories, especially modern day, are rooted in anti-Semitism. The problem is that that point is kind of wrapped in a hand-waving acknowledgement of Israel's crimes in Gaza, and it's creating a weird dissonance. Now, if you want to make the argument that there are a lot of conspiracies rooted in anti-Semitism, a lot of people who do not support the state of Israel, anti-Zionists, may buy into this conspiracy theories and we should work against that. I absolutely agree. I think you can absolutely separate an anti-Zionist critique from an anti-Semitic critique, and also at the same time criticize Israel without falling into the trap of, well, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. I don't think that's a very difficult thing to say, but the way she structured her video is that it doesn't quite hit that rhetorical or argumentative point. And I feel that Natalie's content in the past 5 to 6 years and her approach to it has become more muddled, less focused than maybe her earlier content was, partially due to her ballooning budgets. She makes so much money on Patreon now, she can afford to just go on and on and on and on about her projects, and they have kind of lost focus. Again, I think Envy and J.K. Rowling are our best videos because they have a very clear focus on what they are arguing. Even if they kind of go on some tangents, I feel they do a very good job of weaving in side points and tangents into her main argumentative narrative. But recently, she's gotten a lot of flack on Twitter, and by a lot, she's getting flack on Twitter since about 2020, which I think is something that I should discuss here in a minute, which is that a lot of people are criticizing her for comments about theory, that she doesn't theory's church, essentially theory is like church for atheists. And I found this kind of weird and dismissive as someone who is, she's a philosopher, or she came from a PhD in philosophy, and theory is a very important part of social science critique because it is part of structuring your method and your argumentation. That theory is a framework that you build your argumentation around. Theory is not foolproof, and are there online spaces that get so sucked into theory they forget to make a point or an argument or a critique? Absolutely. I someone that engages in that critique all the time through other platforms, through in-person interaction, through other forms of public discourse. But coming from Natalie, it's a bit weird, and I think it's important to understand that one of the reasons why I think that is that essentially since 2020, Natalie has been essentially the same person, but she's received a lot more criticism, and she's been more responsive to that criticism, dating back to when she brought a trans man on who has some outdated views and has seen problematic by the LGBTQ community. I'm not going to discuss it here. You can go look it up, but essentially it's a one of the things that really got her a lot of negative attention back in 2020, 2021, around the time of right before the COVID pandemic, right around the time of the election. And her perspective has really changed to where a lot of her approaches have changed from making a observational point about human nature or sociology or philosophy or psychology to people being mean to me. And people are being very mean to Natalie. I don't want to bury that point that people have been very mean to Natalie over the past 5-6 years in sometimes ways that I think are just not constructive or helpful and don't really do anything except vent frustration at someone that you obviously have idolized. And I think you should work through that parasocial relationship yourself. But I think it's the point that needs to be taken from Natalie is that in her older videos, she would very much argue a platonic dialogue between someone who represented a leftist point of view and a far rightist point of view, and have some sort of moderation in between there, and as a way of kind of showing the critiques and the ridicules of both the far right, but also how the left sometimes comes up short in its theorizing, especially in online spaces, and then adding historical context as to, well, this is what actually happened. It just kind of lost that a bit. And again, I think it comes to the fact that her projects and her approaches become more unfocused, more ballooning in their budget, and way less efficient in their effectivity, and way less articulated. And I still think that today, because I don't think Natalie's points are new or outdated in the sense of that she is someone who is coming with old ideas. It's that she's always had these ideas, these critiques of, leftism and left being focused more on theory, and the critiques of them, again, her famous phrase, they don't want to wield power, they want to endlessly critique power. And while I think there is a reasonable criticism of spaces online, especially those around, white tea leftists and anarchist and communist movements as well, and certain Discord spaces as well, I think that there is a lack of understanding. Well, why is that? Why is there a lack of, ground roots organizing? Or is there a lack of ground root organizing? Because there's definitely a lot of ground roots organizing through Black and brown communities, through indigenous communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very white-centered critique and a very white online space critique, which is where she gets most of her criticism and critique from. And I feel like that there's a lot of personification around the fighting itself, where Natalie's critiques have less analysis beyond her personal gripes with individuals that have harmed her as well. And so I stand by the video that I made last year that, I think we've just moved on from Natalie Wynn as someone that is not only just influential, but as someone that is producing the best critical analysis that exists in a space like YouTube, in a capitalist system that you're trying to make money from. Again, look at subscriber count. Ain't no money coming here. This is for the love of the game. And one of the channels is obviously FD Signifier, who draws Natalie Wynn as an inspiration, but there's so many others that have drawn direct inspiration from Natalie Wynn. And I think that she has made a space better for a lot of other creators, not to ignore all the other trans creators, Black and brown creators that were on YouTube before Natalie Wynn, and of many different identities, many different backgrounds. But if we're taking Natalie Wynn as a intellectual beginning point for a lot of what we now see as the popular channels, I think she's had a net positive impact in that space. But it's okay to say that we've moved beyond her. She is still in that mindset that she always has been, if I'm being perfectly honest, even back in 2017. It's just in 2017 that mindset seemed radical, and nowadays it seems so benign because of the changing circumstance of the past 9 years. And that happens. That happens with academics. That happens with creators, where if you're not pushing yourself and you're not trying to evolve your craft, and I don't think Natalie's really done that since 2020, 2021, that she has really tried to push and evolve herself or work on articulating herself in different ways, I think that, this is just what happens. She's always been the same person. She's always had the same points of view. She's just become not as good as articulating them anymore. And I think she's just become a bit outdated in that discourse and learning, and that's fine. Will she change her viewpoints and evolve? I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me because other people are already moved beyond her. So she's not going to watch this video. And I hope she doesn't watch this video. Like, take a break off the internet. But I think the important thing to realize is that it's really easy to dunk on Natalie Wynn because she is so prominent and people have had their phase where they discovered ContraPoints and it's played such a big role in either the creative or personal lives. And I think it's okay to say, this was a good time. It's just not for me anymore. And I think that we just reached that point for a lot of people.